Today's daf is daf Yud Dalet. We're going to start with the last line of daf Yud Gimel Mid Beis. Hahu oris varusaso, the asul kami de Rav Yosef. He omra minei, v'hu omar in minoi. So we have a case in which both the oris and arusaso admit that the Vlad, the pregnancy, is a result of his bia, the oris's bia. Omer Rav Yosef. Rav Yosef says she's believed, and we don't assume that the Boel, the father of this fetus, is someone other than the oris, and therefore the fetus would be a mamzer. She's an Eishasish. Lemai nechushlo. What should we be afraid of? Chada, number one, Kamoda. The oris himself admits that she didn't have znus in anyone else, but he's the one who's responsible for pregnancy. And furthermore, a woman is believed to say Lakasha Nivalti. And therefore, when she claims that she had a relationship with the oris, which is a kosher, then we believe her. Amalei Abai, sister of Yosef, from the way that you formulated your response, the ruling, it seems that everybody should agree that she's believed in the case that we have in front of us of the oris's moda, and that means that even according to Rabbi Yeshua, she's believed. If, on the other hand, the oris is not in front of us, and he doesn't take responsibility for her becoming pregnant, then it would be a matter of machlokes between Rabbi Yeshua and Rabbi Gamliel, and only according to Rabbi Gamliel would she be believed. And in this story of the Oris and the Arusa, Kilo Modeh, Machshir Rabbi Gamliel, even though the Orus does not admit that he's the one who's responsible, nevertheless, Rabbi Gamliel would rely on her nemonis, and we can be Machshir the Vlad. So the Gemara, Abai asks, V'amar le Shmuel Rabbi Yehuda Shinina, that's how he called Rabbi Yehuda, sharp one. Halacha Rabbi Gamliel, but Atlo Tavid Uvda Ad Deika Rov Ksherim Etzla. We're not going to do a Maisa Lifsok Halacha that she's believed unless there's Rov Ksherim. If they're Rov Psulim, then we're going to pass a Misaf. Vahacha Rov Psulim Etzla. Basically, all the people in the world are Psulim because she's an Eishasish. The only one who's not posel is the Oris himself. So how could Rav Yosef say that we should be machshir based on Halach Rav Gamliel? We only machshir like Rav Gamliel in the case of Rov Ksherim, but not in the case of Rov Psulim. And Abai understood that when Shmuel said to Rabbi Yehuda that halacha, even though it's like Rabbi Gamliel, but nevertheless, even Rabbi Gamliel himself requires Rov Ksherim. So Rabbi Yosef asked the kasha, how could we be machshir in this case of the Oris and Arusa when it's Rov Psulim? So l'taimech, Gemara says, if you're going to be machshir, if you're asking this kasha about Rabbi Gamliel, that Rabbi Gamliel himself would not be machshir without Rov Ksherim, is tikche lachi gufa. The words of Shmuel are themselves difficult. Halacha v'yatlo tavid uvda, we're pasking like Rabbi Gamliel. He should have said even Rabbi Gamliel would not be machshir unless there's Rov Ksherim. So what's the lashon of atlo tavid uvda? The lashon sounds like that Rabbi Gamliel himself, he would have been machshir even in Rov Psulim, but you shouldn't do a ma'isa based on Rabbi Gamliel. So it comes out that according to Rabbi Gamliel, we're going to be machshir even in Rov Psulim. So why shouldn't we go ahead and do a ma'isa based on the psak like Rabbi Gamliel? Because we're pasking like Rabbi Gamliel, elamai isloch lemeimar. True that halach is Rabbi Gamliel even in the case of Rov Psulim, but halachatchila hab'di'ev. We're not going to do a ma'isa and rely on Rabbi Gamliel to be machshir in the case of Rob Psul, but the Evid, if a woman is already married, and now we want to break up that marriage from her husband, then for sure the halach is like Rabbi Gamliel, and she's believed we're not going to be motzi on mibaila. That's called b'di'evid, and therefore we could certainly rely on Rabbi Gamliel in a b'di'evid situation in order to maintain the marriage as it is. And here also, in the case that we're dealing with of an Aris and Arusa, k'di'evid dami. It's like a b'di'evid situation. She's an Eish. And b'di'evid, the halach is like Rabbi Gamliel even in Rov Psulim. Again, this is called b'di'evid because we're going to have to break up the marriage. And we're not going to do so even in a case of Rov Psulim, because we're going to rely on Rabbi Gamliel in a case of b'di'evid. Now, it's interesting. Her situation as a married woman after the Erison is b'di'evid. But what about the Vlad? We're going to be matir the Vlad to marry Nicole, and we're not going to assume he's a mamzer. I mean, that's already a din of lechatchila. But apparently, and this is what the Ramban points out here in this sugya, if we would be posil the Vlad, then the Baal himself would understand that she had a relationship with another man, and therefore her situation vis-a-vis him is Nesra Labaila, and therefore he's going to divorce her. So in order to maintain the marriage, which we call the Eved, we're going to have to be Machsha the Vlad as well. Rami le Abaye le Rabba Umi Amar Rabbi Yoshua Ein an Emenes, that she's not believed to say Lekosh Nivalti. In other words, Rabbi Yoshua rejects Uki Gavra Cheskes Kashrus Uraminu. Let's ask a stira from another statement of Rabbi Yeshua. Hey, Rabbi Yeshua, Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseir Alamanis Isa Sheik Shera Lekuhuna. So you have a case of an almana who was married to a Suffolk cholol, and if he was definitely a cholol, she would be psula lekuhuna. But since he's only a Suffolk cholol, she's kshera lekuhuna because we're going to say uki gavra cheskas kashrus. We're mvamid hosa al cheskas kashrus in posana sami Suffolk. So Rabbi Yeshua clearly holds that ma'amidim es ha'isha al cheskas kashrus. And that contradicts Rabbi Yeshua in our Mishnah, who says that we don't employ the cheskes kashrus. We don't rely on the cheskes. We're going to pass on misafek because of the shema, because of the doubt. Maybe she had a beer to apostle. Amalei. So Rabbi responds to Abaye, Hachi hasht. You compare the two cases. Hasam, in the case of Almanas Isa, we have a svara called Chazaka Isha Nises Bodekes V'Nises. Before a woman gets married, she checks out her husband-to-be to determine whether he's a kosher apostle. And therefore, we're going to say Uki Isha al Cheskes Kashrusa because she is Nises Bodekes V'Nises. But Aval Hacha B'Nidon HaMishnah, which is the case of Ra'ua Metaberesim Echad, V'Isha Mizana Bodekes V'Zana, would a woman who's having a relationship with another man in Znus check out to find out, is he a kosher, is he not? For sure, a woman who's Mizana ain't a Bodekes Umizana. And therefore, Rabbi Yeshua is going to be Machmir, and he's going to say, we're not going to apply the principle of Uki Gavra, Aches Kasa. Rather, she's Asur Misaf. Gemara asks Amar Rava, I don't get it. You're asking this kash. You should have asked another kash. Rabbi Yeshua, Rabbi Yehuda kasha, Rabbi Gamliel, Rabbi Gamliel lo kasha, Rabbi Tani Seifa, Amar lehem Rabbi Gamliel, kibalnu eidutzcham. We accepted the edutz that Almonas Itzas Kshera Lekuhuna. Aval ma naseh Shari Gozar, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, Shelo lahoshiv bezdin al kach. We're not going to establish a bezdin be mater Almonas Isa Lekuhuna. because HaKohen Shom Lechem L'Rachik Avalo L'Karif. The Kohenim are only interested if you tell them she's Asura L'Kuhuna, but they're not going to listen to you if you're going to be Makariv her and assume that she's Muteris L'Kuhuna. And this is based on the fact that Kohenim were very careful about their yichus. So it comes out now that Rabbi Gamliel passes like Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai that Almonas Isa Asura L'Kuhuna. And he's not going to employ the chazaka and say mamidim osa cheskes kash, and that contradicts what he says in our Mishnah, where Rav Gamliel says she's nemenes to say lekosha nevalti, and uki gavra we mamid osa cheskasa. Elomar Rava Rav Gamliel lo kasha. This is very fundamental. The Hasam, in the case of the Mishnah Mitaberes and Muberes, is Bari. Her taina is that she knows for certain, without any doubt, that she was Nivel Kosher. And add to that the Cheskes Kashrus. But Hach, in the case of Almonas Isa, she doesn't taina Bari. She married a Suffolk Chol. So her taina is only a taina Shema kosher. So this is why Rabbi Gamliel is machmir in the case of Almonas Isa, because we're lacking a tainus barik. Her taina is only a taina Shema. She doesn't know. So basically, we're not accepting the answer of Rabbah about chazaka she'icha niseis bodekes min niseis. The Hasam, in the case of Ruah Midaberes, Umuberes, is Chad Sveika, there's one suffix. Was she Nivel Lakashal Apostle? Rav Yeshua is Machmir, and he says we're not going to be Mamid her on a Chazak. But Hachma, in the case of Almonas Itza, trace Sveikiam. There are two Sveikas. So again, let's review. There's no contradiction between the two statements of Rav Gamliel, because it all depends upon whether it's a Tainus Shema or a Tainus Bari. In the case of Ra'ua Medaberes Muberes, her Tainus is a Tainus Bari. She can identify the person that she had a relationship with, and he is kosher. And add to that, Uki Gavra Cheskes Kasher. Now, as far as Rabbi Yeshua and Rabbi Yeshua, there also we have a reconciliation. And it all depends upon whether there's one Tafek or two Sfeikas. In the case of Ra'ua Medaberes, there's only one suffix, whether the boil is kosher or possible. And on that, Rabbi Yeshua says one suffix is not enough to rely on the cheskas kashrus. But Hacha, in the case of Almonas Isa, here's where even Rabbi Yeshua would admit that we could be mamid gavra cheskasa. Why? Because trace feki. We're the trace feki. So first of all, the first suffix is in the mother herself. She married a suffix cholol. So we don't know whether she's ksheira lakuna or not ksheira lakuna. Now, as a result of her marriage with the suffix cholol, she gave birth to a child, and we have a suffix where that child is a cholol or not a cholol. So he writes here in the Masifta, quoting the Shita Mekubetzes, which is very important on the Masechet Ketuvot, he says the following: Asher nisalo isha zu shenisalmu harei safek almonas cholol. The safek im nifsal al yado lo. Hasafek lo nolad mikolcha el mikolcha safek shel imo shenolad bas safek. And therefore, Rabbi Yeshua is mekel and shnei sfeikos. He's going to apply the principle of uki gavra cheskes kashrus. Hilkoch. Oh, now the Gemara just gives you the final definitions of where we go in these sfekis, according to Rav Gamliel and according to Rav Yeshua. Rav Gamliel, when you have a suffix, olim le bari, dafilu bechad sfeka, nami machshe. So Rav Gamliel puts all his eggs into the basket of Tainis Bar in the case of Re'ua Medaberes. But the kilo, Shema, but he doesn't give any credence to a claim that's based on Shema, that's based on Suf. Vafilu b'sfek nami pasuk. In Almanis Isa, we said there were two tzfekas, and yet Rav Gamliel would say it's possible. Why? Because we need a Tainis Bari. And in the absence of Tainis Bari, which we're missing in the case of Almanis Isa, Rav Gamliel is going to pass. Again, according to Rav Gamliel, all the emphasis is on one Sfeika versus two Sfeika. Rav Yeshua, no, I'm sorry. And that was bad what I just said. Rav Gamliel puts all the emphasis on Bari or Shema. And Bari will be reliable even in one Tafek, and Shema would not be reliable even in two Sfeikas. Rav Yeshua, all in like Chad Sfeika, Dafilu Bari Nami Pasal, Vikile, Spek Sfeika, Dafilu B'Shema Nami Mach. So according to Rav Yeshua, all the emphasis on one Safek versus two Sfeikas. If we have two Sfeikas, that's the case of Almanis Isa, Rav Yeshua is going to say that we can be making. And that's because we have a double suffix. So that's Rabbi Yeshua and Almanis Isa. But in Re'ua Medaberes, that's only one suffix, and the boel was kosher. And therefore, even though she's tiny at Tainis Bari, Rabbi Yeshua disqualifies her Tainis Bari, and he says that in one suffix, we cannot apply the principle of Uki Gara Cheskas. Tana Rabbanan Ezuhui Almanis Isa. Who is the almanu who was married to a suffix chalal, about which Rabbi Yeshua and Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira ruled that she's kshera. Kol she'ein ba lo mishum suffix mamzerus, lo mishum nesinus suffix nesinus, lo mishum suffix ovdei kochav. In any of these cases, we don't have an almanis isa.